We are looking at Don't Talk About Physics Fight Club, Eric Weinstein versus Sean Carroll, Science Showdown. That speaks to like Piers Morgan's tabloid origins. This is from Piers Morgan, Uncensored. Piers Morgan brought together two of the most important physics minds of the modern era to, debate important issues in physics. And what better place, Matt, than on YouTube on Piers Morgan's show for that?
Some have said that this is a little bit like Eric Weinstein's debate with Mick West, part 2.
Yes.
Standing in for Mick West as the normal human being is Sean Carroll. And Eric reportedly is doing the same old tricks. But you be the judge, gentle listeners.
You be the judge. Yes, we may have a couple of clips to illustrate that. Let's see. But in any case, this is Eric Weinstein and Sean Carroll. So we're going to go through this mostly chronologically, because it's, I think, the best way to approach it. But starts off with Sean Carroll being asked by Piers to outline various things in physics and whatnot. And this little clip has both that and also Piers trying to Piers feels like the kind of guy at the school shouting, fight, 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 right? To try and tee things up. So pay attention here to the way Sean responds to Piers' provocation and also his general communication style, because I think it's going to be a good contrast as we move on.
What is your main bone of contention with Eric Weinstein?
You should probably ask Eric that. I mean, I'm a working physicist. I am a professor in a physics department. I write physics papers. I have found myself in the awkward and unenviable position of defending the establishment heterodoxy. It's never what I imagined I would be doing, but there's good reasons why the heterodoxy is the heterodoxy. So I think that academic physics, even though I'm happy to disagree with certain choices they make about what to work on and what emphasis to put on there, is working in good faith. I think that we're trying our best to understand the universe at a deep level. String theory, which we'll talk about in the program, is one example of this. I have my disagreements with string theorists, my agreements with them, but I respect it, and I think that they're trying their best. And if someone else comes up with a better idea, they'll move what they're doing and focus on that idea. It just hasn't happened yet.
I feel like Sean is very much a kindred spirit to us, Chris, because his representation there of the academic discipline is exactly how I would describe it if I was describing psychology. And I think you would if you were describing anthropology. I've got lots of criticisms of it. There's lots of things, in my opinion, they could do differently. There's a wide variety of approaches. There's certain things we've definitely gotten wrong and we need to do better. But ultimately, I think it's a bunch of people doing their best.
Yeah, I might have some stronger criticisms for mainstream anthropology than you.
Yeah, I'd probably be more critical of psychology than Sean would be of physics, but rightly so, I think. I think we're in a good shape.
But in general, his approach there is I'm a physicist, I work there, I'm interested in things, I have agreements and disagreements about various topics, but, that's it. That's all. And when he was invited to, express what his issue with Eric Weinstein is, he, didn't take the bait, right? It was well, you can ask Eric whatever he's upset with there. So this is still Sean Carroll. I thought this is again, a nice, neat illustration to start off with. He's asked about what is string theory, a fairly complicated physics concept to wrap your head around, I think. And let's hear how Sean goes at trying to explain it to Piers Morgan's non-technical audience.
For those with smaller brain power than you, what is string theory?
That's a great question. And in fact, very famous string theorist Joe Polchinski wrote a very influential paper called What is String Theory? Decades after string theory started being a popular theory to think about. And the fact is we still don't know yet. It's an approach. You start with a very simple idea that instead of the universe being made of particle-like things at the fundamental level, like the electron being a point-like particle, the photon, etc., which we all knew wasn't exactly right anyway, but we can talk about that later, replace that with a little loop loop of vibrating string. Now, why would you do that? There's a prehistory that goes into features of the strong interactions that motivated people to do it. They looked at this idea, what if the world were made of little loops of string rather than point particles? Problematically, the theory kept failing at what they were trying to do with it, which is explain the strong nuclear force, because it kept predicting the existence of gravity. So eventually people said, well, wait a minute, gravity exists. Maybe this is a theory of gravity as well. And after many, many years of hard work on the part of people who were otherwise ignored by the community, they showed that it's actually a very successful theory of gravity and possibly everything else. You have to buy a lot of extra stuff, like extra dimensions of space-time that we don't see and so forth, what is called the holographic principle, which again, we could get into if you want to. But the theory keeps moving forward while at the same time utterly failing to connect directly with experiments. So this has caused, a lot of hair pulling among the physics community. The theory looks very promising, but we haven't actually been able to put it to work to connect to the real world.
Yep. Nice little overview there.
Yeah, I thought this was a neat, little explainer, right? Because it's pitched at a level that I can follow, right? And it also highlights what the issue is, why there's controversy around it, because it's got this stuff that it does well, but it has these issues which make it subject to criticism. He's not providing a glowing hagiographic account of it. He's just, saying, well, this is why lots of physicists believe in it as a, explanatory framework, but there are issues. Right.
Yeah, I think it's very challenging to be a science communicator and when your science is theoretical physics. That's got to be difficult because, it is incredibly complicated. So you have to pitch it at exactly the right level. And I think Sean Carroll just does a great job, especially when he's only got 30 seconds or so to do it. He speaks very clearly. And it's like you said, he's not trying to spin it one way or the other.
No, it's information dense, right? And the other thing about it is Piers, and I think in general, this is the way people act around physics people, keeps implying you big brainiacs, you look down on us mere mortals, but can you try to stop for a minute to use our, and Sean just is generally responding saying, well, yes, it's a complicated topic, but here's a, so he doesn't, take that, but
there is absolutely, I find that annoying because there is absolutely nothing in Sean Carroll's manner that implies that he's looking down on you, that he's deliberately making things complicated because you poor little pea-brained
or simple. Deliberately making things simple.
Yeah. So anyway, that's good. We're hearing from Sean.
Well, that's Sean. So we've set
good,
up.
All good so far.
Yeah, all good. Let's turn to Eric, right? So now it's Eric's turn to start off, right, and give his account. So that's kind of Sean's account of the field. Let's hear what Eric's account of string theory and the possible debates is instead. It's a bit different.
I mean, I can tell you why the lead tweet in my Twitter feed is assume a traversable cosmos. If Einstein is left in force, my claim is that there are only two rocks that Elon's chemical rockets can get us to, and that we have allowed ourselves to fall into the misunderstanding of Einstein's theory as the map of gravity rather than the territory of where we actually live. I don't think we live in space-time at all. And Piers, I just need to get to one further thing, which is that the really significant problem, I would say I am the only person in Generation X to have actually been present in the room when everything shifted towards string theory, which happened in 1983 at the University of Pennsylvania, when a fellow named Edward Witten gave the first lecture that I think he ever did publicly on string theory. And his will and his mind were so powerful and his influence so completely commanding that the entire sociology of the field turned on a dime in 83 and 84. And as such, I think I'm essentially the only person in Generation X who saw the old culture of physics become the new culture of physics. And what I claim is that Sean and I probably aren't that divided even on the mathematics of string theory. Where we are bitterly divided is that I believe that Sean thinks that the system works pretty well. I would say he's part of the two cheers for the institutions. meaning that he has a to be sure paragraph saying that the institutions undoubtedly have their problems and he wished things could be done better. Whereas I see an absolute collapse in the ethics, efficacy, productivity of this at our deepest levels. And if you're thinking about dark energy, dark matter, dark chemistry, all of the things that physics has done, essentially our modern world has been built by physicists. Even molecular biology and the internet come out of physicists and CERN respectively. With the World Wide Web. So if you think about the impact of physics, more or less, the story of physics is the story of the world economy in the modern era.
Yeah. Quite different in tone and content.
Yeah. So Eric's history is very personality focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's Edward Whitten. And not only that, but Eric was in the room at that moment, when the whole field shifted, and he's the only one perhaps that observed it.
Yeah, it turned on a dime, and it was all to do with these characters, which we have to remind listeners. I'm not sure if it's entirely clear or not, but it seems pretty clear that Eric Weinstein has taken credit for coming up with the Whitten equations.
The Seeberg-Whitten equations.
Seeberg-Whitten equations, thank you, yes.
Yeah, so yes, this is true. He has claimed that. He's claimed that he developed them first and then was discouraged from pursuing them. And then, like later, they were, unveiled by Seeberg and Whitten. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's going to come up, Matt. That's good. You will hear it reference.
I probably doubt this story that he presents of modern physics, that it all turned on a dime. The crux was, a couple of individuals, one of which was Eric Weinstein, and that it was based on, one or two personalities. I think it's a much more complicated than that. There's actually huge community of physicists and huge factions and themes that have unraveled, involving probably thousands of physicists over decades. And then he also sprinkles in some little random things like about Elon Musk and his view that there's only a couple of planets or something that they can reach, and this is somehow related to all of this somehow, and dark energy, dark matter, dark chemistry. I don't know what dark chemistry is, but rattles off a whole bunch of things.
The dark web.
Yeah. So, one is left feeling more confused at the end of it rather than clearer.
Yeah, though I would say the vibe is clear, right? Like Eric's vibe is there was basically like a hostile takeover of the field because of one event. And yes, it connects in, as it always does, to his narratives that his theory would allow us to traverse the cosmos, escape Einsteinian limits. And on top of that, it doesn't just touch on physics, it touches on economics, it's everything. Perhaps this might link to the application of gauge theory in economics, which Eric also talks about in other venues, but whatever. So, and there was one note, Matt, this also comes up. Eric peppers this in, just like he peppered it into the conversation with Mick West.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
I don't have the sense that there's any real reason for any animosity between you and myself, to be honest, at all.
No.
Why do I have the takeaway of what are you doing in my timeline again? In other words, I would imagine that in a slightly different world, universe A prime rather than A where we live, you and I would be naturally allied on this topic. And I don't do many of these. Look, I really hate interpersonal drama. And so in general, I avoid these like imagined dust ups because I was never looking for a dust up with you. We share too much in common. I'm worried that you're screwing up the Overton window when we need to be dragging it more open so we get more information.
He said, Sean and I we aren't that divided on the fundamental maths with this kind of thing, right? Throughout the conversation, he'll make reference to actually our disagreement is hard to fathom, right? Like there's something strange about it. And this is the thing that the gurus often do where they imply that you guys could be good friends if you just, weren't being so antagonistic with them for unknown reasons. So this is Sean's response to Eric's account. And this is where, things start to devolve, if you will.
Okay, so my takeaway from that, and was brilliantly articulated, Sean, is that basically you are going to be responsible for the end of civilization as we know it.
Apparently, yeah, I didn't know, but now the weight is bearing down on my shoulders. Look, the story Eric just told is a kind of wacky and wildly misleading history of physics in the last 50 or 60 years. The idea of quantum gravity is a very natural one because the world runs by the rules of quantum mechanics as far as we know. This is the International Year of Quantum because it's the 100th anniversary of really figuring out how quantum mechanics works. And the thing about quantum mechanics is it's not a theory by itself. It's a framework in which you can do theories, in contrast with classical mechanics from Isaac Newton that came before it. And gravity, our best current theory of gravity from Einstein, the theory of general relativity, is a thoroughgoingly classical theory. Certainly, the default expectation is that someday we will better understand gravity at the quantum level. You don't have to think that because you don't have to think anything. You're welcome to come up with better theories. But again, that's the default expectation. If you have a different point of view, there's a certain burden of proof to convince people that it's interesting to contemplate this other point of view. The idea of actually doing the detailed calculations to quantize gravity goes back to at least the 1950s, but it instantly hit roadblocks, and physicists were smart enough to know that it wasn't working the way they wanted it to.
Yeah, again, I think a very clear explainer of where things are at and a dose of reality compared to the weird spin, the narrative that Eric presents about the story of modern physics just bears very little connection to reality. And Sean points that out.
And he goes on, this is the second half of this, where he just explains, counter to Eric, rather than Witten's lecture being the fundamental thing which convinced everyone to turn on a dime, he says, no, it was more like this.
Apparently, what you would need is some kind of miraculous cancellation between all the different contributions from all the different fields. And people looked at that and said, we have no idea how to make that happen. Let's not worry about quantum gravity. And then string theory comes along. And again, it wasn't even trying to be a theory of gravity, but when they do this calculation, the miraculous cancellation happens in string theory. You get a finite answer to what happens when you scatter different particles off of each other. That is right now the only theory in which that miraculous happening actually works. And this was finally put together as a sort of sensible, viable theory in the mid-1980s. And it was a calculation by John Schwartz and Michael Green that showed that the theory did not have what are called anomalies. And you can look up the magazines at the time. Physics Today ran an article saying, anomaly cancellation launches superstring bandwagon. The point is, the reason why I had to go into those details is many, many physicists instantly became interested in string theory and quantum gravity who were not before. But the reason they did is not because Ed Witten is a smart guy and he towers over the field. It's because there was a calculation that showed the theory is promising. Physicists are not sheep. If Ed Witten had said we should all work on this, but everyone else looked at it and thought it wasn't very promising, he would have been ignored. But since then, there's no competitor to string theory that has had that miraculous feature that string theory has.
Yeah, again, I find this kind of reportage of what's going on in physics for a general audience done in a very brief period of time extraordinarily clear and eloquent. And I like what he says is exactly true, right? Like I know enough about modern physics. Like I don't understand it, but I know about it, if you know what I mean. Like I know this, right? That string theory is very interesting, has widely considered to be very interesting from a theoretical point of view, does useful mathematical things. But as Sean Carroll has said many times, it's not perfect. It's got big problems, right? In terms of being, empirically testable and so on. So, this is why there is a lot of legitimate interest in it in the broader physics community. There are dozens of very important and at least 6 or 8 like leading string theorists. It's not all just like one guy who just points the finger and everyone follows like sheep, just like he says. This is the situation of the field at the moment, not the sort of cartoonish version that Eric has provided.
Well, let's see how Eric responds, because this account, right, it does at least contradict the way that Eric described it. So let's see how Eric responds.
Yeah, I just got completely misportrayed, and this is actually, I'm glad that this is happening, because this is sort of what happens when you tangle with the group of people who are supportive of this program. I did not say what I think Sean is choosing to either infer incorrectly or imply, that somehow the world is not quantum mechanical or quantum field theoretic, and that somehow gravity is given a hall pass to go home and enjoy relaxation where everyone else has to work hard. What I said was that the idea of forcing gravity to submit to the same quantization procedures that have been successfully applied to other forces and to matter has not worked. It has stagnated the field, and that quantum harmonization is far more important. You could also decide to geometrize the quantum rather than quantize gravity and thus quantize the geometry. So because Sean's framework precludes somebody saying something outside the framework, the inference is that someone ignorantly just said that gravity can be kept out of the quantum framework, which I absolutely don't say.
The only thing that will comment on, Chris, or that I will, is just that very quick, immediately taking that aggrieved tone. Sean Carroll has misrepresented him. And this is emblematic of what happens in physics. Like, all Sean Carroll did was correct the cartoonish version of modern physics that Eric provided, providing a realistic one. Eric responds with, this is the kind of thing, being corrected like this, disagreeing with me, is the kind of, sickness that has infected modern physics.
This is what happens when you tangle with this group of people, right? So Sean is immediately
part of the group,
and now representative of the physics mainstream, the physics mafiosa, right? The big archaeology. And in any case, though, it's notable that what Sean actually said, I have the transcript in front of me, right, Matt? And he said, someday we will better understand gravity at the quantum level. You don't have to think that, because you don't have to think anything. You're welcome to come up with better theories, but again, that's the default expectation. If you have a different point of view, there's a certain burden of proof to convince people that it's interesting to contemplate this other point of view. So, counter to what Eric suggested, he did not say anybody that dares disagree is a moron and you're not allowed to do it, right? He actually explicitly said, it's fine. You just have to provide the evidence for why anybody should take it seriously. That's all he said. But Eric already is aggrieved, and he's going to get more aggrieved to spoil it. So again, this is Eric going on, and let's see how he frames, more of this. Moving on now a bit more to, as he describes it, the sociology of the field.
I would happily cede to Sean all sorts of things, like the string theorists are by far the smarter group of all people trying to go beyond the standard model in general relativity. I would further cede that if the task is to quantize gravity directly, the string theorists and the string theory program have been more successful. But what you just saw is an example of what is actually going catastrophically wrong in the field, that a dominant narrative that has been perseverated into an as-if reality has created two teams, a smart team that gets it and a dumb team that just doesn't. And that kind of toxic sociology is the true problem. And my guess is that will recur multiple times during this thing, is that I will not be heard, and that Sean will continue to have a version of Eric that lives in his head, which shares my name, but not my understanding nor my beliefs.
So it's really interesting to hear Eric, almost on purpose, derail the conversation, take the innocuous things that Sean Carroll is saying and find a way to make a point of grievance on it. First of all, he's portraying it as, it's weird to describe string theorists as the smarter group, as then people, the physicists who are enthusiastic about string theory are the smart ones. It's no, I don't think people in physics classify each other like that. They disagree, but they don't go, okay, you're the dumb group and we're the smart ones.
Yeah.
And Eric projects it as, this is an example of how he won't be heard and, he's being silenced. And Sean Carroll is basically imagining that Eric is something other than he is. So in other words, misrepresenting him at
misunderstanding.
Yeah, so it's he's just like sabotaging on purpose, which I think is understandable when you understand Eric's motivations here.
He is doing that, but we'll see if it has any success with Sean. But, you know, the part that got me there, Matt, is Eric said, like, I'll cede to Sean that, you know, the string theorists are the smart group, and I'll cede that they're, you know, doing the better.
But Sean hasn't claimed that.
No, I know. It didn't say that. Then he says, and this is the problem, splitting it into smart group and dumb group. And you're like, you did that. You just did it. You were the one that said, I'm going to do this. You ascribed it to Sean, which isn't something he said. Then you complained about being misrepresented, but you not only created the insult, then got offended at it. You also misrepresented what Sean said and then complained that you are going to be constantly misrepresented. So Eric is like almost constantly complaining about things that it is him that is doing it. And Sean is not. So I want to call this out because it's going to happen repeatedly. Okay. We're moving along, but yeah, so Eric's hackles are up, it's fair to say. Now, at this point, you know, Piers steps in. He's going to get, you know, things on track, and he's talking about like Eric's paper and whatnot, but he doesn't have the ability to assess it himself. So he did what any good, responsible, like critically minded person would do. He went to YouTube and searched geometric unity, and let's see what he found.
Now, because you're so smart about this stuff, your geometric unity paper is 69 pages long, extremely complex, way over my head. So we did what everyone in my position does these days. We went onto YouTube and saw if we could find anybody who'd analyzed it and had a conclusion. And we found this.
Thank you to Eric Weinstein. It's an avant-garde and creative theory. Curt here, several months later. This has been so long in the making. Geez, you have no idea. Anyhow, I wanted to say that I mean what I just said. I may have said this before in the iceberg, and if I haven't, I should have because it bears repeating. I haven't seen a theory like this come from any single individual ever. Not one that's this fleshed out or has this amount of unexampled connections within itself, as well as to what's known as the theoretical physics backbone that we talked about earlier.
Now, Eric, there's lots of people doing stuff like that about it. Why do you think that the mainstream physics world is not taking this seriously enough?
Why indeed? So, yes, amazing journalism skills here. Curt Jaimungal's Theory of Everything podcast. We don't need to remind listeners, of course, that Curt Jaimungal has also enthusiastically endorsed, what's his name?
Chris Langan. His channel is a shrine to alternative theories of everything. The name, it's in the name, but it was also, when you go back and look, the sense speakers are there, John Vervecchi, Jonathan Pajot. It's the usual parade of sense-making figures.
Yeah, eccentric cranks, which is fine, right? But that's a YouTube channel. So answer me this, Chris. So given that there is a YouTuber out there who is enthusiastic about Eric's unpublished theory, why isn't the physics community taking it more seriously? Answer me that.
Yes, well, so now let's hear. Eric is the first one to respond here. Just to mention, yes, we have an episode that breaks down the Curt Jaimungal coverage of Eric's theory. It's rather credulous. There was critical papers that examined Eric's theory from a technical point of view. Tim Nguyen and Theo Polya, right? Who's Theo Polya? But you know, that wouldn't be of interest to, and it's kind of, frankly, it's above Piers Morgan's pay grade. But Piers also says there's a lot of people that are interested in this idea. You know, this Curt Jaimungal, they could have took like any, and I think that's actually entirely true. But in any case, so how does Eric respond to this? And the framing of this was also that like the physics community is not, you know, diving into Eric's paper with any enthusiasm. And here's what Eric says.
Well, first of all, I disagree. You see, part of what's going on is that Sean is part of a group of physics influencers who are constantly spreading misinformation, which leads to a climate of fear. I, for example, found the following quote of Sean. What I really, really want to get across to the audience is that nobody in physics departments is discussing this with other people in physics departments. Now, I don't happen to be coming to you from a physics department at the moment, but I happen to be on a 5-day visit to a leading physics department. And in this situation, I just had a 9-hour conversation and talk with 3 hours or 4 hours rather of that being an explication of geometric unity. What Sean is doing constantly is attempting to say, look, let's do some pattern matching. We have a man generously in midlife. He's not trained in the subject. He doesn't appear to accept the quantum gravity program. He appears to be possessed of the idea that a single individual, Ed Witten, caused all sorts of people who aren't sheep to cohere into a single framework that has been perseverated and doesn't seem to produce fruit. He has a telling of the tale that is, first of all, just not courageous. It's at odds with reality. From my experiences in this physics department, what I can tell you is that we have a situation in which everybody sees the problems.
I don't remember, Chris. Did he ever make it clear, like, which physics department, like what some sort of visit he?
Well, it was clear that it's an leading physics department. He does mention later some universities that he's been invited to, MIT and whatnot. You'll hear him reference it. So it's often, but like Matt, this two-step around the anti-institution credentialism is infuriating, because has Sean at any point in this conversation so far invoked his elite credentials? I haven't heard it, and I'm not going to hear it.
No.
Right. But Eric does it at every turn, and all of these gurus do it while constantly, maligning that that's what others are doing. And he's also said there, Matt, just to highlight that, he's telling the tale that I'm some kind of cook, a middle-aged guy with a theory of everything who blames everything on Ed Witten. And that's not a misrepresentation, Eric. One, he didn't present it like in that strong of a frame as what Eric's saying, as disparagingly. But two, it was Eric that did that. Eric said that the field turned on a dime when Ed Witten said the thing. And he's constantly saying, he said Sean's a physics influencer, spreading misinformation, right? Like he's constantly disparaging, implying that there is a cabal that's like kind of, pushing string theory. So Eric saying, I'm being misrepresented as this crank with a theory of everything who blames, individuals. But that's what he's actually arguing. He's saying it's misrepresenting me, but that's what he said.
Well, yeah. And also he's putting words into Sean Carroll's mouth, right? Sean Carroll, we heard him say it. This is the tone that he strikes, which is that, if you want to convince, it's true the physics community isn't paying very much attention to you and your ideas. We probably won't unless you provide us with something to get our teeth into, some actual kind of evidence, and you actually convince people, because that's just how it works. His response to that is, they see me as an outsider. I'm not from the inside, and they see me as someone who's going against their agenda. And he takes the opportunity to say that Sean Carroll is promoting misinformation and is contributing to
and
a
is
climate,
an influencer.
An influencer, contributing to a climate of fear, Chris, and that his representation of, just in a nutshell of what's been going on in physics over the last 50 years was not courageous. So what is that?
Matt,
so he manages to be insulting and inaccurate at the same time, while actually taking umbrage and taking insult, even though none was given.
Well, you remember we noted before in the conversation with Mick West that he invokes like all these kind of social justice concepts, which in other instances he's disparaging of, because he's kind of suggesting that people that criticized him are misogynists, or there's all sorts of things that he plays in.
I am much more careful when I hear somebody talking about chemtrails, for example, if they come from the Black American community, than if they don't. And I'm much more understanding if somebody comes from a radical progressive family that went through the McCarthy era and they don't trust the government. So in other words, when particular groups of people are repeatedly lied to and manipulated and have a different history than the rest of the country, I tend to take their fears much more seriously. If you went through the Tuskegee medical experiment, it's not that crazy to worry about what's in a vaccine. If you didn't go through the Tuskegee medical experiment, if your community wasn't subjected to that, you may have a very different sense that, you know, something's going on. Or if you're aware that we've experimented with biological agents involuntarily against people in subway stations. There's all sorts of weird stuff that we've gotten up to.
Like in any other setting where Eric is talking about people creating a culture of fear and spreading misinformation, right? He would be reeling against, that's what they say about us, right? And maybe, you know, charitably, this is him being, what's the word, like arch, right? In turning the language game around on his attacker. But to be clear, Sean hasn't done that. He didn't say Eric is spreading, you know, misinformation and it's dangerous. He just said it's inaccurate, like his story of the field doesn't represent the history well, but he didn't say, you know, Eric is just an influencer and, you know, like his story is like dangerous and all this kind of thing. So yeah, I just want to highlight that Eric again is complaining. He will, you know, complain that people are demonizing him, but he is the one doing it.
Yeah, it's an amazing little trick, and I think it's quite effective. If you act as though someone has said something or done something, if you act like that, then people kind of don't really remember too much exactly what was said, but they go, well, I guess he must have. You know,
yeah, that was insulting of Sean. Yeah,
he must have been insulting. Otherwise, why would Eric be acting insulted? And because, like people can't actually imagine someone like Eric, right? So it actually makes this technique quite effective.
Yeah, somebody with the, you know, the combination of an extremely thin skin and who is extremely insulting and aggressive simultaneously. Like it's an odd combination to have. But anyway, he continues.
He then goes into this thing that there is no crisis in theoretical physics. And as one of my physics colleagues said last night, the first rule of Physics Fight Club is don't talk about the problems with Physics Fight Club. There is a self-evident crisis. I can show it to you numerically. Somehow, the idea is that a small number of people who are either at the top of the physics influencer pile, which is where I would put Sean, or at the top of the prestige pile in research, have held a view that is completely at odds with reality, whose key feature is the exclusion of different perspectives.
Yeah, and there we hear it again. That there's a crisis in modern physics, and you're not allowed to talk about it. This is the first rule of Physics Fight Club. There's a conspiracy of silence going on, and it's being driven by a small number of powerful bad actors, those people at the top of the prestige pile, top of the influencer pile. Again, it's Sean Carroll, right? Sean Carroll is one of these bad actors. Like you could count, he's already been insulting, frankly, like attacked Sean Carroll's character about 7 times now, and also gotten upset with imaginary attacks on himself.
Slicks on his own. Yeah. I mean, just to be clear as well, he separated out there. He'd put Sean Carroll at the top of the physics influencers, and there's a separate pile that is the prestige pile, right? The like researcher prestige pile. So again, just a subtle dig.
It's just so irritating on so many levels because one, I know in Eric Weinstein's mind, like the influencer pile, right? And the prestige pile that is, you know, whatever people, you know, who are leading the way in terms of thing, like they're kind of equivalent, right? And then they're not, right? So, and someone like Sean Carroll knows they're not, right? He's very clear, right? He has a job as a working physicist. He has a career as a working physicist. He has a side gig as, you know, doing his podcast show, right? Where he does some explainers, he does some educational outreach stuff, he does some interviews, and it's popular, it's engagement, public engagement. And that's all it is, right? It is not actually driving the direction of modern physics, right? Sean Carroll would never think that in a million years, right? And look, I may as well point that here because Eric is having a good go at Sean Carroll. Sean Carroll represents himself as a working physicist, not as one of the leading luminaries. He's not modern sciences, I don't know, John Wheeler or Stephen Hawking or anything like that. He's a working physicist like someone like me is a working psychologist, right? And he's got a very respectable track record. He's been cited 35,600 times on Google Scholar, published hundreds of papers. He's got a credible track record as a working physicist, which, it has to be mentioned, Eric Weinstein does not.
In no field.
In any field whatsoever. He doesn't appear to have published virtually anything on any topic. But Sean Carroll hasn't actually had a go at him for that, right? He has not attacked Eric's
Not yet.
output.
Yes.
Yes, but he will, and I think with some justification, given that Eric has been putting him down.
He's going to specifically reference his paper. He's not actually going to, attack in general, like Eric's other papers and whatnot. But just before we get to Sean's response, okay, so, we make this point that often one of the things that gurus like to do is use technical terminology to demonstrate their intelligence rather than to communicate, right? They aren't doing it in order to use technical language to talk about a topic in a specific way, right? It is rather like a display of intellectual prowess. It's the same with gurus who drop in references to research, right? Like magpies showing off their shiny collections. Now, here's what I would describe as Eric's effort to dazzle with technobabble, but listen to this.
Now, if you ask me what's going on with geometric unity, I can say something very simply that because you have a very large viewership, will go out to many people. You won't understand it, but it'll be over very quickly, and it should be an astounding comment. If you take a Lorentzian metric as a section of a bundle of pointwise Lorentz metrics and pull back the positive Weyl spinners with suitable passing to maximal compact subgroup, you get one generation of Petit Salam grand unified fermions. Now, that was very quick, but what it really just said is that general relativity knows the standard model. Anybody of Sean's ability should be able to parse that 20-second sojourn and say, is that something we know? Is that something that might be interesting? Then what we'll have is we'll have the typical physicist large language model conversation in which physicists will ask, do you have a new prediction at anything at electroweak scale? Which is a question that doesn't get asked to the string theorists.
Indeed.
This is Eric puffing up his peacock's tail, right? It's almost like a display to Sean Carroll as well, like to say, look, just to be clear, Sean, you're messing with someone who's, on the level. I can speak in these dense physics soundbites, and, he warns Piers, the audience won't get it, but this is, to demonstrate my bona fides that I'm the real deal. And then, he preempts saying, and now we're going to hear probably some standard LLM style chatbot response from the mainstream physicist about new predictions and whatnot.
Yeah, and look, obviously the premise of the whole thing is absurd, right? Like rattling off a 15 to 20 second version of your speculative, highly abstract theoretical physics idea. Like, why? Right? Apart from to show your plumage. Like, I think it's quite effective from a rhetorical point of view too. Like, if Sean Carroll responds to that, then it's kind of ridiculous, right? And it's kind of playing into his premise, which is he's the guy, he's the exciting outsider, him on one side, all the physicists, the entire world on the other, take him seriously on an equal footing, right? His theory has been covered on a YouTube episode, Chris. How about that, right? Now, Sean Carroll tries to engage with that. Now, that would be crazy and would be useless. On the other hand, if Sean Carroll says, well, that's just a bunch of words, right? I can't, there's no way I can really engage with that here and now. With that, it's got to do with the details. Then Eric can, of course, then claim that, see, this is how the physics community is just pretending they just don't want to know. This is too dangerous for them to handle.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Sean Carroll's got a damned if he does, damned if he doesn't, confronted with something like that.
And to his credit, Sean is actually a pretty seasoned podcaster by now. So his response, I think, is very good. So I'll play it. There's two parts to it, but this is the first part.
Well, I find it very telling. I don't know. It makes me sad that you are looking for a second opinion about geometric unity and you go to YouTube and see what pops up. I don't think that's the standard to which we would like to aspire. There are professional physicists right there in your country who work on understanding quantum gravity, field theory, geometry at a deep level, and you could ask them what they think. Look, there's a lot of talk so far about sociology, and I'd much rather talk about physics. But I would like to let people out there know who might be working outside the academic physics community that it is 100% possible to have a good idea and have it have an impact on what physicists do. But it's not easy. You have to do a certain amount of work to show that your theory is worth the time, that it is respectable, that it is interesting, that it is promising. The first thing you got to do is make sure that your theory makes contact with modern physics as it is understood. If you have a new paper out, physicists are going to look at it. They're going to look for, where's the Lagrangian? Where's the interactions? Is the proton stable? Is there dark matter? Like, how does it fit into what I already know?
Those are all
Eric's
different
theory,
levels of the stack, Sean.
Eric's paper has none of that. You would also ask, has the theory been shown to be viable in a very basic way? Is it stable? Is it free of anomalies? Is it finite in the sense of the quantum mechanical calculation that I already mentioned? Again, none of that is there. Are there any new predictions?
Yes, a very good response. And, it's just crazy this even has to be said, but there are thousands of cranks all over the world, right? And there are people that aren't even cranks, right? That are just a bit eccentric or have got their own ideas, who are having ideas about physics all the time and are getting to the same point at which Eric has gotten to. But as Sean says, if you want everyone to drop what they're doing and give all their attention to your idea, then you have to do the work. And it's really hard. It's not that there's some rule against that no one's allowed to change the agenda, no one's allowed to contribute. It's just that actually making a genuine contribution at this point is really, really hard. And it's really hard because all the people who are super smart studied physics at university, and you take the smartest of those and they did their PhDs, and the smartest of those are then working and leading labs and stuff. And if they're still struggling to crack a grand unified theory of physics, right, that it's a pretty difficult task, right? So you just don't expect that if you have an idea that everyone has to pay attention to it.
The thing that I liked about this is, again, the information density. You got Sean respond to the point about using the YouTube video for a second opinion and kind of chastise Piers that you could have just spoke to scientists, right? But then second, to clarify that, look, it is possible for outsiders to contribute. And as you said, he then highlighted some of the things that you would need to address in order for your idea to be taken seriously. So he said, very clearly, you can contribute without being inside the mainstream physics community, but it's not easy because, you have to show how your theory, contributes to all these rather tricky questions. Oh, and by the way, just one other point was you heard Eric start to interject, right?
Yes.
What? Excuse me? So, yes, that's important too. But here's the other half of that response.
Eric says, and completely correctly, string theory doesn't make any new predictions either. But also, I really don't want people to get the idea that string theory has some dominant picture. In my department at Johns Hopkins, we have... Let me just finish and then you can talk. I think it's a good system. In my department at Johns Hopkins, we have 6 professors in the theoretical physics group. One of them does string theory, and even he only does it sort of half-time. I wish we had more, honestly. This is very typical. Even at the most stringy departments, it's maybe half the people who do string theory. There are plenty of other approaches being advocated, and many of them do make different predictions, and we're looking for them in cosmology and astrophysics and elsewhere. And finally, does your theory solve any interesting problems that we already thought we had? That's the reason why string theory became interesting, because we had this problem with quantum gravity, that it gave infinite answers, and string theory solved that problem. And again, I see none of that in Eric's paper. So it's very possible that somewhere in Eric's theory, there are interesting ideas, but he has given us no reason to think that it is a promising theory. I encourage other people who would like to have an impact on the research agenda of modern physics to take these easy steps rather than going on podcasts and talking about their victimization.
Oh, I mean, I have to say, it's at this point at which Eric starts to get owned.
He's very upset about this. And
Yeah.
you heard Eric interrupt, right? But Sean, because he's a podcaster, right, said, well, now hold on, I let you speak, let me finish my point. That's a good system. Right. And then Eric was kind of chastised, which he didn't like, because usually this is how people like Eric operate. They interject and they interrupt people and they'll go on. But there, Matt, again, the thing that he said was like, I really am impressed with Sean Carroll compared to other people we cover. Because again, he went into the fact that, yes, Eric's right, string theory is having some issues, around predictions. That's true. Then he clarified that, however, the portrayal of like a unified group hive mind in physics is wrong, right? Because even in his department, there's lots of different perspectives. Even in departments where there's lots of string theorists, like they're not all in lockstep. So it's not as, homogenous as Eric describes. And then he says, okay, now it is possible that you have interesting ideas in the paper. So he's not dismissing it, or that other people could have interesting ideas, but you haven't done the kind of, necessary legwork in order to make people convinced of that. So that's the issue. And the last thing is a dig, right? It's a dig at Eric. But up to this point, he's being quite restrained. And it's a relatively limited dig where he's saying, that it would be better to put more work in than like crying about victimization on podcasts. So
yes. Yeah. Now it is a dig, but it's an accurate dig, because Eric most certainly does do that, and it is good to confront it straight up. Like you said, Chris, I was always impressed with Sean Carroll, but I'm just even more impressed after this episode, because he is an excellent communicator and he is not falling into all of the traps that Eric is laying for him. Eric would like him to support his outsider status, support his idea that he's dangerous and stuff like that, support the idea that, he's simply not allowed to make a contribution. But Sean doesn't go in for any of that. And in fact, I've heard him speak about physics in other contexts, completely nothing to do with Eric. And this is true, right? This is what this is the sort of thing that he says. Like, he has said very similar things to in other contexts. But Eric won't like this. And I think it's a good thing to remember his previous interview with Mick West, when, again, with Mick West, he was very quick to create offense, very quick to sort of derail the conversation, make it about personalities and about offenses taken and offenses given. Whereas Mick West wanted to talk about the topic, which was UFOs and evidence for them or against.
Yes.
Yeah.
Conversely, when we turn over to the UFO community, the issue is, I don't want people who've seen something or who have data scared anymore. And it's very important.
Who are they scared of? I mean, you keep talking about this debunking community, but who exactly are you referring to? I mean, I'm not a person who mocks people.
So that just comes across to me as playing, I'll be blunt, that comes across to me as playing dumb. No, I think that lots of people are...
No, it's a genuine question. It's a genuine question, because there's not very many UFO debunkers out there.
I think it's a really disingenuous sounding question. And I may have you wrong, Mick, but...
Are you including me as part of this debunking community? Who
I can tell you that I find your interaction unpleasant.
Sean Carroll is wanting to keep things straight as well, but he is responding there to Eric's claims of victimization.
Yeah. So he said, we'd rather talk about the physics, but yes. So let's see how Eric responds. There's quite a few things here that we might talk about. So why don't we get started?
Okay. Eric, it's always a pivotal moment in these debates when you put your glasses on. So I'm bracing myself.
First of all, Sean has been nothing but civil throughout our relationship. He's also extremely nasty, but I really appreciate the civility, and I attempt to respond in kind. Sean and I really shouldn't be divided, but we appear to be. I don't understand it. He did respond. It just shows that none of this is serious. Speaking about what I'm talking about, he said, this is not something that is going to be a thing. He also says that he hasn't read it. So let me say a bunch of things to Dr. Carroll. Dr. Carroll, I'd like to hear your explanation for 3 generations of flavor chiral fermions with the observed quantum numbers under the group SU3 cross SU2 cross U1. In another podcast, you said, before I listen to your theory, you should listen to my Sean Carroll's theory. My theory is known as the standard model. I can give you an explanation for why SU3 cross SU2 cross U1, why there are 3 generations, why 16 particles in a generation, why the observed quantum numbers are the way they are, why the Higgs sector comes out of seemingly nowhere with a quartic potential with a quadratic term, why the Yukawa coupling is just there, just so in order to produce mass when the weak force forbids a mass directly in the Dirac operator. Sean knows what every single thing that I just said is in that statement. Why Sean chooses to misportray the fact that I can say why there should be dark matter, what the dark energy is, what the exact quantum number assignments are for the 2 families that are luminous that have yet to be seen, I have no idea, because Sean also proudly says is that he hasn't looked at it and hasn't read it. That's why he says that there are no Lagrangians in it. I have no idea where Sean gets this stuff.
So I'll keep the comments to a minimum here, Chris, but isn't it interesting that his response to Sean Carroll's little speech there, which was very cogent and easy for people like you and me and the general audience to understand, Eric straight away zaps to, chirality and luminous, this, that, and the other, stuff that he knows no one will understand except for Sean. And again, I can't help but suspect this is a debating tactic, because he could be speaking nonsense to Sean and still win the debate in the court of public opinion, right?
Yeah, because it looks like Sean can't respond to him. And I don't think he's speaking nonsense, but, I think he's referencing things that he's addressed in his theory of everything, but without any of the necessary evidence, which is what Sean was saying. So for Sean to get into a technical debate over the state of evidence that Eric has provided for the various things that he's asserting.
Exactly.
Right? It would be a waste of time because there's nothing there.
Well, that's right. And Eric could claim victory, right? Because the conversation is on a level where no one except for Sean Carroll would know that it wasn't stacking up. And to be clear, I'm not saying that he's speaking, nonsense, right? I'm not saying that he's making up all
the
these
terms mean stuff that he's saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know he's referencing a whole bunch of real things, but it doesn't necessarily add up into a compelling argument in the context of this conversation.
No, you could do the exact same thing with any technical language, right? If you understood statistics well, you can speak like this, right, to somebody else that understands statistics, but it doesn't mean what you're saying is actually a kind of coherent thing. You could make debates between Bayesian and frequentists, right, sound like it's this thing, and your statements that you could evoke wouldn't need to be inaccurate to be fairly pointless to a general audience, right? And also, just to note, Eric's reading, right, the thing with the glasses is he's reading a tweet where Sean Carroll is responding, maybe he hasn't read Eric's paper. Now, he hasn't said that in this conversation, right?
No.
He's referenced what is in and not in Eric's paper. So Eric is basing it on, social media, which is the way he operates. But in any case, he continues.
Sean is insistent that the idea that somehow I am not choosing to go through the usual channels and instead talking as he is right now via YouTube is somehow significant when I've just given talks in 3 different countries on dark energy. And by the way, every time I talk about talking about this, somebody is telling me don't talk about the fact that you're actually in a physics department. And what I'm trying to tell you is I give talks in physics departments, I hang out with physics colleagues, I'm welcomed at places like the Institute for Advanced Study, MIT, et cetera, and yet I have to deal with this nonsense. I talk to both physics colleagues. Right now you've got a giant problem called something called DESI or DESI, the dark energy, spectroscopic instrument, which is at the moment going after Einstein's unwanted cosmological constant. That is not a constant. The dark energy is not a constant term. That is the only term that you can put into the Einstein field equations because the Einsteinian curvature satisfies an automatic differential equation called divergence free. So if you have another term in the equation, it has to have the same property. There's only one known automatic equation, which is that the metric of Einstein that creates space-time is annihilated by its own Levi-Civita connection. And Sean, you're misrepresenting things because I'm going to give a formula for the dark energy. I do all sorts of things that you have no idea of because your attitude, which you repeat in other podcasts, and I highly advise you to spend more time in your physics department and less time on YouTube, is that this is not a serious thing. Nobody's taking it seriously. And your misportrayal of the situation is nearly constant for reasons that completely elude me.
Sean?
It is that little two-step, isn't it? Because he's, on one hand, he's on the outside. Nobody in the physics community will take him seriously. You know, he's being ostracized because they're all in lockstep. But actually, he's well respected in the physics community. He gives talks.
Yeah.
He's visiting all the best institutions. Actually, it's Sean Carroll who's the social media gadfly.
And as per usual, there's lots of people behind the scenes agreeing with Eric, telling him that there's, you know, they can't talk about this publicly, but they all agree with him. They like him.
That's right. They're also keen on it, but they don't dare to write a paper about it or to do an experiment or something.
And Eric, again, like takes, you know, giving a lecture as like, you know, that's where the mind's to. And just to be clear, for people outside academia, you can get invited to institutions or departments for a number of reasons, right? Somebody might have just liked you and, you know, thought that you're going to give an interesting, exciting talk. They might be mental themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like it can be that, or they might not be, but there's nothing at university where they're like, you know, we need to sign off that everybody coming into this building has been, you know, vetted and that they're going to give a talk that's perfectly reasonable. That is not it. So Eric is treating it like going to elite institutions and giving talks proves that your ideas are very important. And that's like a thing that's more in the credentialist influencer space that he's deriding there. Because, you know, giving a talk does not mean that you have contributed anything significant on the topic.
No, that's right. It often means you've just got a friend there. Like when Eric does have something like a bit more substantial that he can point to as credibility, then he'll generally go into it in an awful lot of detail, provide a lot of specifics. Given that he's kind of a little bit vague about these visits and the talks, you know, I would not be imagining a large auditorium filled with 100 physicists.
Do you remember it was a while ago that Eric was invited? I think it was the talk about economics or something, and his talk got kind of ripped to shreds. So it does happen. And, you know, there was a professor at Oxford that invited him to give a lecture, right? So these things happen. It's, you know, you go to the art conference in the UK, there's lots of various conservative academics and whatnot that would probably be happy to host Eric in their department. So whatever the case, whatever is occurring there, Eric is definitely laying it on thick that this, you know, is important and that actually Sean is the one who's, you know, just wasting his time on YouTube. And I like that that Sean, you know, kind of laughed and said, wow, in response to that. But Sean's response there, right? So you mentioned the SmackDown, Matt. This is a pretty good SmackDown. So here's how Sean responds.
The good news is I have read Eric's paper. Here it is. I actually have it here, right here. And it's worse than you would think. You know, it just very quickly, it starts off by saying the author is not a physicist and is no longer an active academician, but is an entertainer and host of a podcast. This work of entertainment is a draft work in progress, and it may not be built upon. So we're not allowed to think about Eric's theory and write a follow-up paper about it.
You're very much allowed, Sean.
To everything that is normally done in scientific discourse. You hope that people build upon your theories. You don't try to prevent them. And then later on, it says,
Sean,
this document is an attempt to begin recovering. I'm going to read this. This document is an attempt to begin recovering a rather more complete theory, which at this point is only partially remembered and stitched together from old computer files, notebooks, recordings, and the like, dating back to as far as 1983. And this is why this paper is not going to appear in the peer-reviewed literature. It's not serious. It's a dog ate my homework kind of thing. If you have a dark matter thing, if you have a dark matter prediction, if you have a dark energy prediction, I want to see a plot in the paper. I want to see redshift versus
Sean,
distance. I want to see a calculation of a relic abundance so I can figure out how much dark matter is supposed to be. If you do that,
Sean,
people will pay attention to the theory. It's very possible.
I just have to respect Sean so much for not letting Eric interject, because Eric is good at this, right? He's a good public debater. He is good at all these maneuvers, good in the worst possible way, if you know what I mean. And Sean Carroll is playing with a straight deck here, but he won't let himself be diverted by Eric.
Well, Eric is so, like, in some ways he set his own trap there, because he could have just asked Sean, have you read my paper? You said previously you haven't. Have you now read it? And he would have said, yeah, I have it here. Mm-hmm. Right? And then you wouldn't have got caught in this thing about he's never even read my paper, and then he gets to rhetorically flourish and say, good news. I'm going to read directly from it. Eric again gets annoyed about him reading what Eric put in as a disclaimer about it being a work of fiction, that you're not allowed to, build on it. And this disclaimer, which he adds later, saying, that it's partially stitched together, it's only a partially remembered theory and whatnot. That's all what Eric said. He's just reading from it, right? And then Eric is like, well, come on. And the last thing he said, which only took about 20 seconds, was that all that shit you said about dark matter and whatever, it means nothing unless you're providing these kind of details. If you don't provide that, nobody can assess it, right? So that's it, right? But his critique was like condensed there, and he's saying this paper, you yourself, Eric, are saying it's just, the partial rememberings of notes and jotted down ideas and whatnot. So what are you complaining about?
And Eric's response, of course, is, how dare you? And again,
I have it, yeah.
Well, he's going to say it again, is he? Yeah, so again, this really is similar to the Mick West type thing, where he, again, fabricated a grievance with Mick West, when all Mick West did was basically disagree with him and say, look, you haven't put up very good evidence here. I don't think you've done the work, whatever. He used phrases like, I don't like how I'm feeling in my body right now.
If you recall, part of it was because Mick West mentioned that his interest in the topic, he liked to flex his mental muscles, to dig into it.
And, eventually I kind of settled down in a way on this UFO thing, because it's so interesting in terms of the mathematics, the geometry, and the physics. Very simple physics. Just simple Newtonian stuff, linear algebra, and things like that. It's nothing complicated, but it's stuff that I used in my previous career, and so I kind of enjoy flexing those muscles. And recently, I've been enjoying flexing my muscles, programming simulations, and I do also enjoy the interactions with people. I like talking to people. I like talking to people who believe and people who used to believe, and to a certain degree, talking to skeptics.
And Eric took it as meaning flex, the kind of modern Gen Z lingo of flex on someone, like you kind of humiliate them.
Trying to figure out who's active in trying to bunk things that needs to be debunked, who's confused, who needs to be made unconfused, and who is saying that they're seeing something that needs to be followed up and not necessarily having their reputation destroyed because somebody wants to, in your own words, flex. I don't find the flexing fun. And to be,
I didn't say flex.
You did say flex.
I don't. Well, it's not a word I actually use. So
not say something about flexing your own.
Oh, flexing my muscles, but it's not like flex as in like showboating flexing.
You did say flex.
Yes, I know, but for me, flexing actually means the same thing as stretching or exercising.
Okay, but right now I just went through exactly one of these moments where I tried to remember something you'd said, and then you told me that you don't use that as a phrase. Then I happened to be able to recall it
in that sense, the sense that you meant.
I understand. No.
Yeah.
I think you did say it in the original sense from which the internet term flex comes from. So I don't think that's even correct. So my point to you is I don't enjoy the feeling in my body right now, which is I've just contradicted you. You assured me that that's not a term that you use. We had perhaps at most a misunderstanding, but the feeling of somebody saying, no, you're wrong, and thinking that that's fun, your initial description of your activities as a hobby. I don't much care for this as a hobby. If it's a duty, because the world is going to be filled up with nonsense, I actually appreciate that. I want to be very clear about that. But the fun of interacting with people, many of whom are scared. I've seen people close to and filled with tears. I've seen people who feel that their lives have been destroyed because they have made contact with something that they can't talk about.
Which obviously wasn't what he was saying, but Eric got extremely outraged. And even when he clarified, Eric still asserted that even if that's not what he meant, it is fundamentally what he was saying. So Eric is a master at getting outraged over things that people are very clear that they haven't said that. They're not meaning to insult you in that way. And like Sean Carroll's critique here is strong, right? But it's very specific. It's like, you've published a paper, you haven't provided enough detail for the physics community to grab a whip, so there's nothing here.
And also you yourself in your preamble to it said not to take this seriously. And of course it is just a manuscript sitting on the internet. So I think his conclusion there is very reasonable.
Here's Eric responding to Sean's points. He tried to interject, but now he's going to have a chance to respond, provide interruption.
Sean, first of all, how dare you? Second of all, if you're going to go by the standards of the no, Sean, how dare you cast shade and aspersions of the kind that I wouldn't seek to cast on you, but I will now. Okay. I'm not seeking your favor, nor do I need to seek your approval. As you know, you failed to gain tenure at the University of Chicago. You're not highly regarded in the field. And again, I'm only returning the shade in which you just yourself cast. I wouldn't have done this otherwise. You then spent time as a non-tenured faculty at Caltech, and you only gain tenure in a non-standard professorship. You're not a leading person in the field. My belief structure about this is that you imagine that I'm coming to you saying, oh, Sean Carroll, tell me which graph I should do so that I can please you. As you know, because you've read the paper, what you said about Lagrangians is false. What you said about predictions is false. My concern is what you did is that you seized upon something where people have built on my ideas since 1994. The equations that Natty Seiberg and Ed Witten introduced that took over the world were called the insufficiently nonlinear equations when I was at Harvard in 1987 and introduced them.
There we go. There's Eric claiming he's responsible for the Seiberg-Witten equations, right? He introduced them in 1987, and they're not attributed to him, but they are his. But I just want to note that he had prepared all of Sean's history in advance, because it's not like he just has a flashbulb memory of everybody's credentials. So he obviously was prepared to trot out his employment history, and so much for, he doesn't care about credentials and whatnot. The fact that Sean Carroll was not tenured is an attack line, right?
Yeah.
Which
is absurd and pretty vile, really.
Oh, this is very vile, and I would put it as, this is below the belt shit.
I mean, this is how narcissists react when you prick their bubble or you embarrass them in public, right? The venom comes out really fast. But it's funny to track the logic of his response there. The first part was, how dare you? How dare you cast a spur? Basically, how dare you criticize my paper? Right? The next point was, I don't care what you think. I don't need your approval.
I know.
And then the next part was, you suck. So and then rattles off, as you said, a pre-prepared list of career failings. And I just want to, you have to remind everyone, Sean Carroll's career in physics is 1,000, 10,000. You can't even, it's like comparing his track record in physics. He isn't one of the leading, luminaries. He's not Einstein, right? But regardless, his track record and career in physics is a moderately substantial one. Eric's, we have to remind you,
it's non-existent.
It's zero. It's absolutely zero. So it makes no sense for him to be attacking Sean Carroll's, career accomplishments. And then he says, just like a lot of bullies and, manipulative narcissists, I'm only saying this. I'm only doing this to you because you criticize me.
Yeah,
right?
This is me returning the favor. So this is the kind of thing where, like you pointed out earlier, Matt, when people listen back to this without, critically evaluating it or whatever, just going with the flow. The thing that I think a lot of people's memory do is, well, they were both insulting each other. Like Eric was giving, but, Sean was provoking him at first. And no, like Sean criticized his paper. He criticized the way Eric is presenting the field and failing to show evidence for his claims. But he's been consistently fairly charitable to people contributing from outside the field, to non-string theorists. He's highlighted, various issues and whatnot. So he hasn't been aggressively attacking Eric. He's just been disagreeing. But for a narcissist, disagreement is attack. So Eric took the gloves off, and it's a very stupid attack, because like the response to this could be that Sean responded, outraged and saying, how dare you, or this, because that's how Eric would respond if you suggested 1/4 of this about like his track record or whatnot, right? Like he would not stand for this.
That's right. And that's where people like that often get it wrong, because his intention may well be to provoke Sean into responding how he would, but Sean is cut from a different cloth.
Well, we'll get to that. So this hasn't finished here, Matt. There's a couple more insults to lay on. So here's Eric finishing off, and then we'll get to Sean's response.
The question is why appear as an entertainer rather than as a physicist? First of all, neither you nor I are trained as physicists, Sean. You're actually trained as an astronomer. What you have in this situation is that you and I are both interloping in a field that is not the one to which we trained. That doesn't bother me about what you're doing. I've enjoyed some of your papers. I've thought very poorly of others. You have a wide range of interests. I think you're very creative. Your intellectually insulting aspect reminds me of you as the Marie Antoinette of theoretical physics influencers. I'm not here to please you. You know that there are tables in the document that you're reading that have plenty of predictions. You know that it solves plenty of problems. What you are doing is creating an environment of fear where every university worries, what does it mean to talk to this person? And what I would say to you is you are commenting on the effect that you are in fact inducing. You and a small cadre of people are like intellectual border collies of the physical sciences, casting shade and aspersions on those who are succeeding where the quantum gravity, string theoretic, and M theoretic programs are failing.
Yes. So more of the same, more insults, but also returning to that theme of, by criticizing his material or saying that it's not useful or interesting, he's like the Marie Antoinette of physics influences, again, contributing to a culture of fear that, again, this is, I think, Eric's agenda here, which is to promote this point of view, which is that he is the forbidden fruit, right? He has this dangerous wisdom, and people like Sean Carroll in Eric's alternative universe are these powerful policemen out there enforcing a regime where we cannot let the exciting new ideas in. That's the alternate universe that Eric would like to invite us in on.
The thing to remember through all of the Eric content that we cover and all of Eric's appearances, his primary purpose in anything that he says or does is to promote Eric, to show that he is a complex, serious thinker that needs to be respected, right? That is the underpinning of everything that Eric's doing. That's why he's doing the like physics technobabble speeches. That's why he's aggrieved anytime there's the implication that, he's not taken seriously, or that, and that's what annoys him the most, right? So Sean there insulted multiple times, right? Like basically called, a no-name underachiever who isn't fit to even critically evaluate Eric's paper. So let's see how he responds.
Look, I mean, I didn't say anything about Eric as a person, his history, or anything like that. I said things about the paper. Everything he says about me is like 90% true, as many things he says. The paper is not giving us any reason to think that this approach is promising. There is no quantum mechanics in the paper. There's no attempt at showing that this solves any of the known problems of quantum gravity. Again, it's not just about Eric, it's about anyone. If you want to make an impact on the physics research community, you have to give them a reason to think that what you do is promising.
Sean, you have a serious problem with dark energy that you're developing, and it's going to go right through being a problem with lambda CDM to eventually being a problem with the Einstein field equations themselves, perched as they are atop the space of metrics as a completely inadequate space of field content. What you've just said and what the aspersion that you have just cast, you are simply not qualified to say.
Sean Carroll has a problem with these things, him personally. Yeah, I mean, look, Sean Carroll is doing the right thing here, I think, in terms of
not
debating.
taking the bait.
He's not taking the bait. He's not, like, just imagine if the shoe was on the other foot. Imagine if it was Eric who had been cited 35,000 times and he was debating with someone who had never really written a paper. Never actually submitted one. And if that person had been attacking his track record, his credibility as a
God.
Can you imagine that? But Sean Carroll's a different kind of guy. He's not a fragile narcissist, so he laughs it off and he does what one would ideally do in this situation, which is to not let go of his point, right? Eric basically doesn't really defend his paper, right? He shifts the ground to these personal things and basically throwing a lot of dust around. But he returns to the point, which is that it's not about you, Eric. It's not that you're so dangerous and so exciting that we can't let your ideas in. It's not that you're not allowed to contribute to this stuff. It's just that you have to do better in terms of your contributions. You have to finish it. You have to not take it as a joke before anyone's going to take it seriously. That's an excellent point.
Now, the beauty there is that Sean's saying, it's not about you, Eric. This is like standards that would apply to anyone, and he kind of not taking the bait when Eric has tried to like create this kind of antagonistic exchange. It makes Eric look bad, right? It makes it look like, oh, somebody has taken the higher ground than me with little effort, and they were also suggesting that I'm unnecessarily like personalizing this debate. So Eric immediately, I think this is a great illustration, retreats to high abstraction physics talk in order to go above the audience's level, say, look, this is actually about, these complex physics topics, and you've got real problems that you're trying to ignore that's happening there. And then again at the end saying, you're casting aspersions at me, right? Trying to remind everyone, look, this is about me. I'm being attacked here, and you're not qualified to do that. But that's Eric's technique, is like, speak in very complex, dense soliloquies, imply that there's a lot of like serious debate between equally intellectual individuals going on, and that, they are engaged in all these underhand tactics. But it's Eric. It should be transparently obvious that Eric is doing that, where Sean is maintaining like a fairly straightforward and coherent critique, which is not deeply personal. It's simply, it's roughly critiquing a paper, but that's normal in academia. And he's essentially saying there's nothing there to critique, right?
Yes, when I listen to him debate, it's like when he retreats to that high arcane technobabble. It's like an octopus squirting ink and retreating back to his rock. But the real grappling game for him is actually in the realm of self-aggrandizement, conspiracy, theorizing, and grievance. Like the main emotional hook that normal listeners to this will understand from him is that he's been unfairly smeared. Sean Carroll is part of a powerful group of bullies, policemen that are preventing exciting and dangerous ideas like his getting any play. So like what you said, it is absolutely important to remember with someone like Eric, and like with many of our gurus, is that their goal when they speak is not to communicate in the ordinary sense of the word, but everything is directed about promoting themselves, encouraging you to think of them as important, as wise and instrumental in everything. That is his goal, and he's doing his best. But Sean Carroll is not really handing it to him. He's not letting him be the exciting, dangerous, powerful, brilliant figure that he so wants to be.
Now, this last Oh, well, we're coming to the end of the clips, but I've got a couple more. But this one, Matt, is really guru gold because this is one of the best arguments I think I've heard a guru trot out in a while, like as a kind of emergency maneuver. Break in case of emergency, right? Eric has smashed it and he wants Sean Carroll to, think maybe he's dismissing him too quickly. And what does he invoke to support this?
What you have said is that I have given no reason. Let me imagine that paper, which was a draft rushed to get to an April 1st date, remains in a world where Sam Altman and Elon Musk continue to compete for better and better AIs. What would you say if at some point those AIs then got to that paper and said, holy cow, that is exactly what we've been missing. This thing solves all sorts of problems. And the problem that we have is that a group of influencers with a penchant for being, and this is becoming one of my least favorite words, although I didn't have any negative association until recently, debunkers.
Touche, Sean. What if? Counterpoint. You're saying the paper's not very good. The physics community has not sorted out and celebrated it and rushed away to change the direction of research. But what if in the future some hyper-intelligent AIs were to read the paper and realize that actually it was the secret to life, the universe, and everything? And maybe it's just that you're not smart enough. I think the subtext of this is it could just be that you guys are just not smart enough to appreciate it.
The AI also agreed that the problem was that we have a group of physics influencers. Is that the conclusion of what if the AI also thought that you guys, this is an insane argument, but it's what if in the future some super smart computer said that I'm actually the smartest boy and that nobody appreciated me? And what do you even say to that?
Yeah.
Well, let's hope, Eric, that someday you're vindicated. Yeah, there can't be an argument against it because it's a hypothetical, right? So that speaks to what Eric imagines is going to happen, right? In the future, he will be held up like Einstein, like Newton.
Yeah.
He's just like a genius, not appreciated in his time. But it's absolutely insane that he would invoke that
Yes.
as an argument, right? Have you considered this, Sean?
Yeah. Have you considered this? It's like before when he said, how dare you cast aspersions? I don't care what you think. You suck. This is like a child, right?
It's like a strappy teenager. Yes. So, I mean, the arguments are not more sophisticated, but they're certainly expressed with larger words. And again, this is approaching, like I said, the end of the exchange between Eric and Sean. But after this debasement, Eric needs to kind of puff himself up again. So you're going to hear a little bit more physics technobabble from Eric, and also the kind of trick that he likes to do about implying that, if you just stop being like this, we actually could be friends, right? So he did this with Mick West.
Mm-hmm.
He hears him trying to do it with Sean Carroll.
The problem, Sean, is that you and I are naturally allied on almost everything. We're not very far apart. I don't disagree with the standard model. I think the standard model is the most beautiful piece of differential geometry before it becomes theoretical physics. But one of the things that you just said is that it's a classical field theory that is not quantized. As you well know, there was a revolution in the 1970s which said that we blew Hamiltonian analysis and that in fact every phase space carrying a symplectic form can be treated locally as if that symplectic form is the curvature of a line bundle, and the L2 sections of that line bundle form a Hilbert space, and the P and Q coordinate functions can be promoted to operators. It said that wine is what you get when you stop grape juice from becoming vinegar, and in fact Hamiltonian analysis is what happens when you take a physical problem and you stop it from quantizing itself. That was one of the great errors of our time, that Hamiltonian analysis was actually pointing the way to saying that most classical problems contain the seeds of their own quantization. You know all this stuff, and I know this stuff. We know the same people. We probably can work in the same notation. My guess is that if you and I got over whatever this bizarre tension is between us and buried the hatchet, my guess is that after 2 days, you'd say, boy, I really just didn't understand what he was saying.
Isn't that just the cherry on top? Again, we saw that with Mick West and making out that it's, this silly tiff, right? Yes, we've insulted each other. Things have gotten a bit nasty, but, we could be friends. We could be friends, right? We agree on so much. We speak the same language. We know the same people. We know the same people, Chris. We mix in the same circles, right? Everything Eric says is geared towards, please take me seriously. Please take me seriously. Sean Carroll doesn't care. He doesn't want. I assume he's a normal person. He comes across as a normal person. In which case, he doesn't care about being friends with Eric Weinstein. Eric Weinstein is just a guy on the internet, right?
Yeah.
But turning a debate into like a psychodrama, like a schoolyard, who's friends with who type deal is classic Eric, and it's exactly what we saw with Mick West. And the last thing I'll say, Chris, is that this kind of blowing hot and cold, like being like violent, like really flagrantly insulting and vile, and then switching back to you made me do that, and I only did it because you hurt me by not doing what I want, which is to take me seriously in Eric's case. That is just a classic tool of manipulative bullies. And we saw it with Mick West, and it really annoyed me then. We're seeing it now with Sean Carroll. Both of them are big boys. They're big enough to handle Eric, so we don't need to worry about them. But it is really something.
Yeah, it is. So, that kind of takes them to the end of the exchange around Eric's theory. They then go on, like Piers fires some, kind of quick fire questions to highlight. And there is a nice illustration, Matt, of just the difference between the way that they respond to questions. In one of those responses that maybe it's worth highlighting. So like there's one that's asked about time travel. Sean Carroll's response is pretty quick, right? So listen to this for me.
Fascinating. Sean, will we ever be able to time travel either forwards or back?
Well, forwards, I time travel all the time. Yesterday, I time traveled 24 hours into the future, and here I am. I mean, that's not that hard. Einstein showed us that there's a trick. You can even travel into the future faster by either moving near the speed of light or by hanging out in a strong gravitational field like a black hole. Backwards in time, no. I don't think they're going to be able to do it. I've written papers about it. It's something that is, I would say, conceivable but not plausible. We know how it might work in principle, but all of the indications are it's not going to work in practice.
Yeah, isn't that just a great answer? Like, again, remembering that Sean Carroll is talking to a general lay audience, and he's extraordinarily easy to understand and accurate.
No. Let's see how Eric, same question. Eric, what do you say?
Eric?
Well, as Sean has thoroughly digested my paper, he knows that I believe that there are either 5 or 7 dimensions of time in a 14-dimensional world, which is split 5 of time, 9 of space, or 7 of time, 7 of space. So when you talk about time travel, it's times travel. And only when time is one-dimensional is there an arrow of time. If there were 2 dimensions of time, you'd have a whirlpool. 3 dimensions would result in a right-hand rule of time. These things are technically called orientations. One of the things that is really interesting about multiple dimensions of time, which leads to something which is very poorly studied called ultra-hyperbolic equations, is that you have the opportunity of going back in time without going back through time. So just as you can play a record, and when the stylus comes to the inner circles of the record, you can jump again to any track that you like. On a cassette tape, you have to go back through time. So my belief is, no, we will not go back through time, but we will have to figure out how to stop thinking in terms of initial conditions, because it is only in the case of a single dimension of time leading to hyperbolic equations that you have that luxury. So I think that times travel is going to be perhaps the most interesting thing to come out when you ask, why should we worry about these things? Buckle up.
Fascinating.
Fascinating indeed. Is it though? Is it fascinating? Because I came out the end of that, bored and knowing less than when I started.
Yeah, that is the difference, right? So that just speaks to their communication style. And like Eric, again, referencing, as opposed to Sean, where he's kind of like, oh, there's books written about this topic or whatever. But Eric is like, wants to mention the complex theory and talk about the fact that he's got, multiple dimensions, and it's like a whirlpool, but it's also like metaphors and so on. But it's not done to make it easy for someone to follow. It's to demonstrate Eric is a very complicated thinker, and this is, it's above your level, right? Like this kind of question.
That's right. Like this quickfire session is, it's meant to be like basic kind of questions to get a basic kind of answer. And Sean Carroll gives a consensus view, right? He doesn't take it as an opportunity to go, well, I have this wild idea that maybe then launch into, Whereas Eric, of course, it just takes it as an opportunity to remind everyone that his bespoke theory is truly fascinating and super complicated and just wild, man. Totally wild.
Yeah. And it resolves everything. So now the last part of this, Matt, it's the last just one or two clips, but I think it's worth noting because, we haven't heard much from Piers Morgan. He's interjected a couple of times. He's been enjoying the spectacle, I think, in general about, he's brought these two together. They're giving him good content by doing fiery exchanges and whatnot. This is what he wanted, right? But at the end, he's kind of got fed up with the physics chatter. So this is why he's moved things on to this, what about this eggheads, right? And Piers can see no difference, between Eric and Sean Carroll. I think for him, it's just super smart boffins with their different, ideas. He's such a dick. But he finally ends on a question that he's prepared, right? That he thinks is important. And it's about religion, Matt, in a way. So here's his question.
And my final question is probably the biggest question I can ask any guest. And I've asked quite a few of them. I have to say with very limited responses. So I'm asking two highly intelligent people at this question now, which is I happen to believe in God. And the reason I do, other than the fact I was reared as a Catholic by my mother, is because I genuinely think there must be a superior being out there who is able to answer this fundamental question in a way no human being has been able to answer it for me, which is for those who believe in the Big Bang Theory, what was there before the Big Bang? In other words, what was nothing and what was there before nothing? And because I do not believe a human brain can answer that question, there must be, de facto, a more superior thing out there that can. Sean.
The logic doesn't make sense, right? That his premise is faulty, but also his inference that if humans weren't able to answer that question, that proves there must be a superior being that can. Why? Why must there be? He explains that why he believes there's a God, but there's no indication that this is a conclusion that other people, would have to sign off on. But so this is his big question, Matt. Before the Big Bang, there was nothing, or what was there? And if people can't answer it, that proves God is real.
Yes. Yeah. Isn't that a version of it? Is it called the prime mover argument?
Yes. Yeah. So an uncaused cause. Yeah. The answer, the bit that Piers hasn't got to, the slight limitation there is that, well, before you're God, then who made your God?
That's right.
Yeah, somebody should raise that question. He'll get an infinite loop and maybe explode. But So, but in this case, it's even more bizarre than the usual logic there, because the usual logic is God can be an uncaused cause, so he's the cause of the universe. But in this case, the logic is he doesn't invoke that, right? He invokes that God would know the answer to the question. So,
as to what came before the Big Bang. Yeah. I love it.
He's kind of created his own version of it, which is interesting. So
I just love the scenario where there's all these big brain boffins blathering on about physics, and he's been sitting there patiently, but now he gets to ask them, what about God?
Yeah. And a very particular version of it, he says, like one of the reasons is I was raised Catholic. That might be perhaps the reason I think, unless this really is the logic in which God help you, Piers Morgan. But Sean Carroll's response, Matt. Let's see how he does with responding to this logic.
Well, I'm glad to be the one who frees you from your religious convictions, because the human brain can absolutely tackle that question, and it does so all the time. I encourage viewers/listeners to listen to the upcoming episode of my podcast called Mindscape, where I talk to Nies F. Shorty and Phil Halper about exactly this question: what happened at or before the Big Bang?
Yeah.
We don't know the answer. We don't even know whether the Big Bang was the beginning.
Well, there you go.
So the fact that we don't know doesn't mean we can't know. Those are two very different statements.
Well, if you don't know, you can't know at the moment. Surely you have to admit you don't know.
I don't know, and we're doing science on it in the hopes that we will know.
Yeah, but
That's
with
how
respect,
science works.
Sean, with respect, it is utterly impossible. You will never, as a human being, be able to tell me what was there before nothing. How can you? You can't comprehend it, can you?
I come up with a theory. I show that the theory fits the data. That's how we do it.
What
That's
was there
science
before
is.
nothing, then? Go on, best guess.
We don't know. My personal favorite theory is there was a pre-existing universe out of which our cosmos arose as a baby universe
And what was there
due to
before
a quantum
that?
fluctuation.
What was there before that?
No, it's infinite in time in both directions.
So what was there before? So you mean it's never ending?
Yeah. I wrote a book, if you want to read it, Piers.
I do.
From Eternity to Here. It's a great book.
I do, but what's there before eternity?
There was no such thing as before eternity. Like, what is less than minus infinity? That's not a sensible question to ask.
Yeah, but
Piers Morgan is so stupid, Chris. He's so dumb. I mean, like putting aside the whole atheism versus God, but that thing that he is so certain that this says he's found like the most incredible, unanswerable gotcha.
I know.
Right? I mean, I know Sean Carroll has got a more sophisticated or complex view about cosmology there, but the really conventional one is that the beginning of space-time is basically where the Big Bang is, right? And it's just not sensible to ask what happened before then.
In the same way of asking what's north of north.
Yes, that's right. What's north of the North Pole? Yeah. But I mean, I only mentioned that to say that, like, just because you can ask the question, what's north of the North Pole? Oh, you can't answer that, can you? See? Right? Therefore God, right? Just like not all questions are well posed.
Even in this case, so like this is true, and Sean Carroll's going to go on a little bit to address that kind of point, but Sean Carroll didn't even take that tactic, right? Like he actually said, well, we can investigate this question, and I have some theories about, what things may have come, and it might involve universes, with infinite dimensions and whatnot, right?
No, Chris, we don't know now. He doesn't know now, so he's not. So we can't know. It's impossible. Can't be done.
Yeah, I know. So there's that, but so Piers kept insisting this is a gotcha, like because you can't answer it, can you? Then Sean Carroll responds a bit more.
Yeah, but I think it's a cop-out by you, if you don't mind me saying this very respectfully, to say that something is infinite, because if you're saying it's infinite, you don't have to answer the question. You've just made that up. You don't know it's infinite.
This very often happens in the progress of human knowledge, that a question that we thought was an interesting one becomes not answered, but shown to be uninteresting because we get a deeper understanding.
See, that, I'm sorry. I'm going to come to you, Eric, on this. That seems to me a very pompous answer. That is basically trying to apply a superior intelligence to a response to a lesser mortal by saying that my attempt to get this question answered is so stupid that there should be no need by the brain power in front of me to answer it.
No, it's exactly the opposite of that. I don't know why people are trying to psychoanalyze me and think about what I'm thinking of them. What I'm saying is,
yeah, Piers Morgan is the same. Like, wants to
as Eric.
Yeah.
Like he didn't say, he was saying we can pose these good questions, and as we find more information out, we might find out that like the question that we thought was, important, it actually doesn't make sense in the way that the universe is structured or whatnot.
like it's literally not saying everyone's an idiot for asking the question. Like that's even a theme in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Chris. You know, all the people go to the Great Machine and they wanted to answer the question, what's the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, and it turns out it's not a good question. This is a common thing. There is such a thing as a badly posed question. You have a better understanding, and you realize that it's not an answerable question in the terms that you assume that it is.
And Piers' response to be like, "Oh, excuse me, this is extremely pompous of you to say that, you know, this is a question that can't big brain geniuses." Like, he's the one that's been constantly calling them big brain boffin geniuses, and now he gets like all offended about it. And again, Matt, it's like a shower thought that he had, right? Like it's based on nothing except him feeling smugly satisfied.
Yeah.
And actually, he's the pompous one, assuming that like this thought bubble he's had is something that is beyond anybody to ever answer or respond to, and it proves that God exists. That is a pompous inference to make, and it's an insulting one for like people who don't believe in God, right? Like, because Sean Carroll isn't saying at any point you can't believe in God for your own reasons. He's just saying, look, the evidence doesn't support that, you know, claim, because we may very well be able to answer this with like physics and evidence in enough time. But like, and Piers is just, you know, furious right? that he would dare say that maybe it isn't like a well-posed question as we get more information.
I mean, I think this is the theme of this episode, Chris, which is people who have done very little work on a particular topic getting furious and aggrieved with the people who have for not taking their asinine shower thoughts seriously. Sean Carroll, as he said, has written books about this stuff, right? But he's not giving a one-sentence answer that pleases Piers Morgan. So Piers Morgan claims that he's a pompous asshole.
Yeah. And now let's just, for contrast and to finish, Matt, let's hear how Eric responds to the same prompt, right? So Sean Carroll, he didn't do well. He did not please the great, you know, lesser can of Piers Morgan. So Piers, you know, flips over. Well, Eric, what do you got to say about this? Can you rescue the situation? And let's see what Eric goes with.
All right, Eric, am I mad?
No, I mean, look, one of the things I like, Piers, is that you invite me on this program often not to do battle, as we heard in the previous segment. So let me try something as an offering to the good Dr. Carroll, and you can tell me whether this matches anything, because I also share atheism at some level along with him. What I believe is that you're conflating three different category problems. One, you're talking about something observational, which might terminate at what we would call the surface of last scattering, the thing that we cannot see beyond with our instruments. That takes place along the lines of something, let's say, called the cosmological model, which is a reduction of Einstein's field equations assuming greater symmetry. That is a 1,3 problem where you have one dimension of time, 3 of space, and you can prove that there's something called an essential singularity in the center of a black hole, a Schwarzschild singularity, and an initial singularity in what would be called a Friedman-Robertson-Walker metric. So that is a map of the territory that we are trying to observe. But there's a third thing, which is an assembly sequence, which also has an ordinal concept of development, which could be confused with a chronological one of time. What is it that built the manifold so that time could progress? Now, the thing that's truly radical about geometric unity, and I think Sean would probably agree with this if he's read it at all, and I'm not sure that he has, is that it is the only theory I know that begins from almost nothing and tries to get, and by a theory of everything, we don't mean all knowledge, we mean a complete set of the rules of the universe. What it says is that 4 degrees of freedom are all that is necessary for the quark, lepton, CKM, PMS, et cetera, PNMS structure of the universe. That basically sweet, salty, sour, and bitter, or treble, mid, bass, and reverb is all that's necessary to create a universe.
Wow,
It's not finished. I cut it there. It goes on.
I'm just imagining Piers Morgan's sort of eyes rolling backwards in his head. Did he like this answer, Chris?
Oh, he liked it. Yeah,
liked
he liked
this.
that.
What?
He responded, because, like, the thing is, it's too complex, right? So, like, whereas Sean Carroll responded clearly,
Yeah.
and Piers does the thing of saying, so, like, ultimately, we can't know, though, right? You're right. And Eric's like, yes. And then he's like, well, we all agree that we can't ultimately, but I couldn't understand. I couldn't follow all of that. But, like, there you heard that. That's probably the best example of, like, Eric just waffling on referencing topics that there's no way Piers Morgan understands, right? Can even get to, and he brings it back to,
Yeah.
he takes a dig at Sean Carroll. He probably hasn't read my work. My theory of everything is actually the solution to your question, blah, de, blah, de, blah. And it's all like, this is the clearest thing. Sean tried to answer his question straightforwardly and he got told off. Eric blavers like a maniac about like 100 different things. And this is kind of more satisfying to Piers because it implies that his question is very deep and complex. And, this is the kind of complex stuff. He can't follow it, Matt, but it's a good question.
Yeah.
Right? It's a good question.
Yeah, that's right. He started off with flattering Piers Morgan at the very beginning. That's right. And wouldn't be so crude as to disagree with him. Look, this is why there's no justice in this world, Chris. This is why we cannot have nice things, because Eric's behavior here gives... It is, as what you said, is what Piers Morgan wants, to just hear some technical babble that he doesn't understand, right? But it's all very mysterious and very smart sounding, and to have his own perspectives kind of respected, right?
Yes.
That's what he wants. You have someone like Sean Carroll who is doing his best to give a straight answer to a let's face it, a very difficult question, one that nobody really knows the answer to, but he's giving an honest and straightforward answer, which is not the one that people often
Piers
want.
Morgan wants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is why we can't have nice things.
And the very last thing is that Piers Morgan suggests that, like, they've both, been talking bollocks at the high level, like, that he can't follow. But maybe what they all need to do is just hang out and get a beer and they'll realize that they're all good friends.
I appreciate you coming together. I realise you are at loggerheads about a few things. I suspect, as Eric said, Sean, if you spent a couple of days together over a few pints of foaming British ale, or whatever your tipple may be, you probably find you end up best buddies. And I would love to do that interview if you ever do that. So thank you both very much for joining me.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us, and Sean, thanks for doing this. Maybe a cocktail instead of some lager.
Bit bitter, just bitter to be clear. But thank you both very much.
It's that thing, Matt, it's the guru sphere always rotates on the notion that interpersonal friendship is actually ultimately what it's about. Their differences, they're just great big minds colliding about big ideas. But, Sean Carroll and Eric Weinstein, they're, who can tell? They're both equally blavering about ideas without explaining things for the layperson. And that's not true. It's not true. Nor was Sean Carroll the rude, aggressive person, right? And nor would it matter if they met in person and could have a pint together, because it's such a low friggin' bar, and it wouldn't change anything about the evidence that Eric has offered. Like, it wouldn't matter.
That's right. It would not matter. Yeah. It's pretty sad the way that journalism of Piers Morgan,
Of the Piers Morgan variety.
of the variety, but the way it intersects, right, with YouTube, influencer stuff, and the actual business of science communication and just public engagement. And it's just really sad that I think there are good examples of it, and I think Sean Carroll's Mindscape is one where you have interesting guests and you have accessible, like, public lectures, public conversations, which are meaningful and are at the right level. And then you have a bunch of operators who are
bloviating narcissists
whose intent and goal is not to inform, educate in any way, shape, or form. It's really just to self-aggrandize, and they do pretty well in this ecosystem.
Oh, they do fantastic. And the only other point I'll make to finish, Matt, is like, I saw some people that say, like, why would Sean Carroll do this? Right? Why would he put himself through this? But I actually respect Sean Carroll for doing this and handling it as well as he did, because despite the fact that people will, kind of be led along by Eric and his framing of things, Sean Carroll represented himself very well. He didn't let himself be pushed around. He didn't play into the interpersonal dynamics. And he made a strong critique of Eric. And for those who are willing to look critically at it, they will have noticed that Eric was puffing himself up, being aggressive, deflecting, and all these kind of things. So I think it is much better that a Sean Carroll is there and willing to come across as a reasonable person and present the mainstream perspective versus Eric and some other guru physics or Curt Jaimungal.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. A less scrupulous physics influencer, the kind of person that
Sabine Hossenfelder.
yeah, that would be less good in many
Yeah.
ways. Yeah, no, it is important. I mean, there are precious few academics who are willing and able to do that. Sean did, I think, impeccably. I can't imagine somebody handling Eric better than, and I thought Mick West did a great job too. And yeah, I think I agree with you, because if people like Sean Carroll don't step up and take those slots on a stupid show like Piers Morgan's, then they will get filled by self-promoting windbags. Yeah, the Curt Jaimungals of this world. Yeah. Or if we're lucky, if we're very lucky, the Sabine Hossenfelders of this world. But I much prefer it was Sean Carroll representing there.
Yeah, so there we go. Well, we covered it, Matt. We were asked by many people to do so, and we have done so. None of it is surprising for us in the way that Eric behaves. It's absolutely in line with how he usually behaves, but it is a kind of paradigmatic illustration of lots of the dynamics that we see in the Gurus Forum more generally, the Weinstein brothers collectively, and in Eric in particular. This is his modus operandi. So yeah, there you go. Kind of vintage Decoding the Gurus material. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for again demonstrating all of the things that we don't like to see. But it is a useful lesson for people. And if you ever run into someone in real life who adopts that kind of passive aggressive, bullying, manipulative approaches with you, then get out. Get out.
Quickly, run far away. Pour the cocktail in their head and sprint off.
That's right.
Or you
don't
just
drink
distract them with a cocktail.